In 1942, a German officer received a medal, not for winning a battle, not for saving lives. He got it for killing 25,000 people in less than 48 hours. He didn't hide from what he'd done. He bragged about it. He treated it like a personal record. A number to beat next time, because to Friedrich Jeckeln, murder wasn't chaos. It wasn't rage. It was engineering. He looked at genocide the way a factory owner looks at production. How many bodies per hour? How many pits per day? How do we make this faster? He built a system so efficient that other S officers studied it, copied it, used it in cities you've heard of, and cities you haven't. By the end of the war, that system had a body count over 100,000, and then one winter morning in 1946, in a public square packed with 4,000 people who'd spent years too scared to even meet his eyes, the machine finally broke. What happens in the next 10 minutes is the story of how the most efficient killer in the SS built his empire, and the twisted moment his own victims finally got to watch it collapse. Let's get into it. Quick thing before we go further. This channel exists for stories exactly like this one. The real ones. The ones that don't get taught in school because they're too dark, too complicated, too human. If that's the kind of history you want, hit subscribe right now, tap the bell, and stay to the end, because the ending of this story is not what you're expecting. Let's go back to where it started. February 2nd, 1895. A quiet town in southern Germany. A boy named Friedrich August Jeckeln is born into an ordinary family. No warning signs. No violence at home, no dark prophecy hanging over his crib. He grows up practical, orderly. The kind of kid who likes systems, structure, rules that make explodes. World War I swallows an entire generation of young men, Jeckeln included. He fights as an artillery officer. He trains as a pilot. He survives 4 years of the deadliest, most mechanized slaughter humanity had ever seen. He comes home decorated, an Iron Cross, a wound badge, a hero on paper. But here's the twist nobody tells you. Coming home was the dangerous part. Germany in 1918 wasn't a country that welcomed its soldiers back as heroes. It was a broken, humiliated nation. No jobs, no money, no meaning. Jeckeln, like millions of other veterans, was left standing in the wreckage of everything he'd fought for. And broken men are exactly who extremist movements go looking for. On October 1st, 1929, Friedrich Jeckeln joined the Nazi Party. This wasn't some late convert jumping on a bandwagon. This was years before most of the world had ever heard the name Adolf Hitler. He was in early, and he was about to prove just how far, oily and ambitious, could take a man with no conscience. What happened next should scare you, because it shows how fast evil can climb when nobody stops it. Within a year of joining the SS, he's already commanding a battalion. By 1932, before the Nazis even fully seized power, he's been promoted again and elected to the German Reichstag, military command, political power, both at once. And he wasn't hiding what kind of man he was, not even close. Colleagues called him ruthless, cold, self-serving. In the summer of 1933, he helped orchestrate a wave of political murders, killing communists, union leaders, and social democrats who stood in the Nazi Party's way. He was so obsessed with total obedience that he once had one of his own SS men executed simply for stepping out of line. This is the man Heinrich Himmler was about to hand an empire of death. June 22, 1941. Nazi Germany invades the Soviet Union. It's the largest military operation in human history, and it's about to become the deadliest chapter of the entire war. 1 week later, Himmler makes a decision that turns Friedrich Jeckeln into something the world has never seen before. On June 29, 1941, Jeckeln is appointed higher SS and police leader for southern Russia and Ukraine. That title sounds bureaucratic. It is anything but. It puts him in direct command of the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile death squads carrying out the Nazis' final solution across the east. This isn't persecution anymore. This is industrial extermination, and Jeckeln is about to become its most terrifyingly efficient architect. Here's what made him different from every other butcher in the SSE. He thought like an engineer. Jeckeln didn't just give kill orders and walk away. He redesigned murder itself, like a factory line. One unit handled registration, one handled transport, one handled the killing, one handled the bodies. Nobody had to do the whole horrifying job themselves, just their one small, specialized piece of it. Historians would later give this system a name, the Jeckeln system. It wasn't built on ideology, it was built on throughput. On one horrifying question, how many lives can this machine end per hour? He tested it first at Kamenets-Podolsk, Ukraine. In just 2 days in late August 1941, nearly 24,000 people were dead, and that was only the rehearsal. What came next would put his name in the history books forever. September 1941, German forces capture Kyiv, Ukraine's ancient capital, home to one of the largest Jewish communities in all of Europe. On September 26th, notices appear across the city. Russian, Ukrainian. Every Jewish resident is ordered to report the following Monday morning with their documents, valuables, and warm clothing. The notice claims they're being relocated. Failure to appear, it warns, means death. It was a lie, engineered with terrifying precision. Survivors would later recall genuinely believing they were about to be evacuated by train. The station was right there. Why would anyone assume otherwise? Nobody could have imagined what was actually waiting for them at the edge of a ravine on the edge of the city, a place called Babi Yar. Over the next 48 hours, using the exact system he just tested in Kamenets-Podolsk, Friedrich Jeckeln oversaw one of the single deadliest massacres of the entire Holocaust. Tens of thousands of people, stripped, marched to the ravine, shot in groups at its edge, an assembly line of death, running for 2 straight days. And here's the part that should genuinely disturb you: Jeckeln wasn't a desk-bound bureaucrat signing off on paperwork from 100 miles away. Witnesses and later trial testimony confirmed he was physically present at the killing site involved, reportedly proud of what he'd engineered. But Babi Yar wasn't the end of his story either. It was practice for something even worse. Later in 1941, Jeckeln gets reassigned north to the Baltic states, and in a quiet forest outside Riga, Latvia, he starts planning his deadliest operation yet. The target: the Riga ghetto. Thousands of Latvian Jews who had already spent months starving under occupation. On November 30th and again on December 8, 1941, Jeckeln's units marched roughly 25,000 people from the ghetto to a forest clearing called Rumbula. He picked the site himself: soft, sandy soil, easy to dig, easy to fill. He personally supervised the digging of the killing pits, specifying the exact depth, the exact width, exactly how the bodies should be packed in to save space. This is a man who treated mass murder like a logistics problem to be optimized. Nearly all 25,000 people were killed in a single, horrifying wave, one of the deadliest 2-day massacres of the entire war. And once again, Jeckeln didn't authorize it from a distance. He stood there, he watched. The regime was so pleased with his efficiency at Rumbula that they gave him a medal for it. Let that sit for a second. A medal. For this. By the time Nazi Germany's defeat became inevitable, prosecutors would trace Friedrich Jeckeln's trail of blood across 3 countries and calculate his personal responsibility at over 100,000 deaths. Jews, Roma, Soviet civilians, political prisoners. He turned genocide into paperwork, reports, statistics, efficiency metrics for human extermination. But here's the question that matters most: did he ever answer for it? By 1944, the tide had turned. The Red Army was advancing westward, fast, and Jeckeln's empire of death was collapsing with every mile they gained. He was finally captured by Soviet forces near Halby in the closing days of the war in May 1945. But here's what most people don't realize: the Soviets hadn't just been fighting a war. Since 1943, they'd been quietly building a massive investigative operation, specifically designed to document Nazi atrocities on occupied Soviet soil, collecting evidence for exactly this moment. Jeckeln, along with 6 other high-ranking German officials, was brought to Riga to stand trial. It would come to be known as the Riga trial, nicknamed by observers Little Nuremberg. From January 26 to February 3, 1946, the Grand Hall of Riga's House of Soviet Officers was transformed into a courtroom. And this wasn't quiet legal procedure. Everyone in that room knew exactly what it was: theater. Justice staged for an audience that needed to see it. The defendants sat stripped of every insignia on their uniforms, stripped, symbolically, of the power those uniforms once carried. For days, witnesses took the stand: priests, doctors, soldiers, even a 14-year-old girl, testifying in front of rows of their own neighbors about exactly what they had lived through. This wasn't distant history to the people in that room. Many had personally known the accused, or buried family members because of them. By the time Jeckeln stood to face judgment on February 3rd, he'd already endured 29 separate interrogations. His defense never wavered. He was just following Himmler's orders. It didn't matter, not even a little. Soviet prosecutors had built an airtight case. Jeckeln's own words, testimony from survivors and participants, and captured German documents proving he hadn't just given the orders. He'd been there, personally, hands-on, bragging about it afterward. All 7 men were sentenced to death by hanging. And now we're back where this story started. The condemned men were driven, in the open, across the river to a field now known as Victory Park. Roughly 4,000 people gathered to watch. The first public execution in Riga in over 300 years. Somewhere in that crowd stood a 17-year-old Holocaust survivor named Frank Gordon, staring up at 7 empty nooses swaying in the wind. The 7 men were brought forward on parallel truck beds. Nooses tightened around their necks. Then the trucks pulled away. Gordon later described the sound that tore through the crowd in that exact instant. Not a cheer, not quite a scream. 5 years of pure terror releasing all at once. And then the crowd surged forward, ripping the boots and clothing off the bodies in one final act of humiliation. Gordon, a man who had lost family in the Holocaust, later admitted something complicated in his memoirs. He called what the crowd did an act of barbarity in its own right. But when it came to Jeckeln specifically, he felt nothing but deep, personal satisfaction. Friedrich Jeckeln's execution didn't undo what he'd done. Nothing could. Over 100,000 people were already gone. but for the people of Riga. People who had lived for years inside the machine he built. Watching him drop was the closest thing to balance they would ever get. The Jeckeln system remains one of the most chilling case studies in the entire history of the Holocaust. Not because it proves monsters exist, but because it proves something far more disturbing. Genocide doesn't require monsters at all. It requires ordinary skills, logistics, organization, engineering pointed at the worst possible purpose by ordinary men who simply chose to stop being human. Today memorials stand at Babi Yar and at Rumbula, not just as graves, as warnings, that the machinery of mass murder is rarely built by fanatics screaming in the streets. It's built by quiet, competent men who do exactly what they're told, and do it well. Friedrich Jeckeln is remembered exactly how he should be. Not as a soldier, not as an administrator. As the architect of one of the darkest chapters in modern history. If this story hit you the way it hit us researching it, do 3 things right now. Subscribe to the War Files so the next one doesn't slip past you. Hit the bell so you actually see it. And drop a comment telling us who we should dig into next. Because trust us, this isn't even close to the darkest story we have. We'll see you in the next one.